Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's doctoral seminar featuring Nicole Pettitt and Molly Friesenborg. Nicole is a Ph.D. student in Applied Linguistics and ESL at Georgia State University. Molly is the Director of Programs at Girls Incorporated of Greater Atlanta. She has experience with a variety of youth serving agencies with strengths in informal education and program development. Thank you both very much for sharing your knowledge today of community-engaged research. We're looking forward to hearing your insights. My name is Jennifer Nye, and I'm one of the moderators tonight. I'm currently the Manager of Professional Development for Learning A to Z, and I'm a doctoral student at Kent State University in Ohio. I would also like to introduce Dr. Peggy Albers, Professor of Language and Literacy Education in the College of Education at Georgia State University. Dr. Albers is the founder of Global Conversations in Doctoral Preparation, as well as Global Conversations in Literacy Research. The Global Conversations in Doctoral Preparation, or GCDP, are mentoring web seminars that are designed by doctoral students for doctoral students. These seminars offer different perspectives on various topics related to the doctoral education experience. We are very excited to have doctoral candidates like Nicole and Molly, and next time, Kim Foster, Kyle Jones, and Nick Thompson from Kennesaw State University, respectively, to share their experiences with us. We welcome doctoral students from across the country, as well as internationally, to present at these webinars. We hope that these seminars will be extended into global conversations around doctoral preparation so that we can learn from and with one another. These doctoral web seminars cover a range of topics. They can be about research we are engaged in, some aspect of the doctoral program, or about how to mentor ourselves into the academy. Tonight's presentation by Nicole and Molly, An Introduction to Community-Engaged Research, is one such mentoring session that will guide us in our academic research and writing. Tonight we are using Blackboard Collaborative, and I hope that you will become familiar with the tools. Feel free to ask Nicole and Molly questions by typing in the chat box. We will be collecting questions as we proceed with the seminar. There will be a question and answer at the end of Nicole and Molly's presentation. Right now, please share which part of the world you are joining us from. You will see a toolbar on the left where you can click on a star. Drag it to the place you are on the map. Or, if you like, you could also type in the chat box. Great, thank you. It is nice to see previous GCDP participants, and it's nice to see people joining us from other places around the world. It is now my pleasure to present Nicole Pettitt and Molly Friesenborg as they offer their insights on community-engaged research. Nicole is a Ph.D. student in Applied Linguistics and ESL at Georgia State University. As a language research fellow, Nicole conducts research in and with community-based educational organizations. Her current work centers on the English language and literacy learning of adult and adolescent refugees with interrupted formal schooling, as well as teacher education within those contexts. Her previous experience spans nonprofit and higher education settings and includes teaching ESL and Spanish, grant writing, program administration, board service, and service learning program coordination. Molly is the Director of Programs at Girls Incorporated of Greater Atlanta. She has experiences with a variety of youth-serving agencies with her strengths in informal education and program development. Her past experience also includes nonprofit fundraising and marketing, specializing in individual given and special needs, or special events, pardon me. Molly currently serves as board chair of Young Nonprofit Professional Network of Atlanta, is an AmeriCorps alumna, and was awarded the Nonprofit Leader 30 Under 30, awarded by the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. Nicole is collaborating with Dr. Margaret Thompson of Boston University on a manuscript related to IRB and issues of informed consent when carrying out research with English language learners, especially individuals who have interrupted schooling in their home countries and perhaps emergent alphabetic print literacy. Some of her recent publications include Narratives of Ethical Dilemmas and Research with East African Refugees, which was published in Ethics in Applied Linguistics Research, Language Researcher Narratives. The Possibilities and Problematics of Research with Adolescent Adult SLISE, which was published in Low Educated Second Language and Literacy Acquisitions, Proceedings of the Ninth Symposium. And also, What Happens When a Low Educated Multilingual Adult Learns to Read, which was published in Writing Systems Research. Many doctoral students find that their research interests take them beyond the borders of their institutions and into their surrounding communities, after-school programs, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and more. While many community-based organizations and Ph.D. students can benefit greatly from research partnership, the practical training in community-based research is difficult to come by in most Ph.D. programs. In this web seminar, Nicole and Molly will provide an introduction for Ph.D. students interested in conducting research in community-based settings, as well as current or potential community partners. Again, we welcome Nicole and Molly in their presentation this evening. Nicole and Molly, you may take it from here.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to talk to you about this topic. And I think mostly we wanted to come from very different perspectives. So Nicole's had some amazing research partnerships as a researcher in the community, and I've been able to, working as a nonprofit, work with many researchers that are coming to work with the clients we work with. And so we really have felt that we both learned different lessons from both sides of that equation that we'd like to share. But in addition, we're also both really passionate about trying to make all of those research opportunities really be mutually beneficial and something that can work both for the researcher and the questions that they're trying to get out of that research, but also can be useful for the organizations and partners in the community that you're working with.
Thanks, Molly. So frequently when we think about community-based research on the university side of things, we think about community separate from research. As you can see, my hands are actually community and research, as you can see from our slide where we have community and university in separate boxes. And tonight we'd like to think about how we can possibly bring community and university together a little bit more, and how the various interests and the commitments that we have, how they can be brought together and co-inform a little bit more.
So because, of course, as teacher and youth development person, we can't just sit here and talk at you this whole time. We want to have you interact with us a little bit. We'd love for you to take a minute and really think about how you define community. What does that mean to you, and what are the examples of community that maybe you're involved with? And we'd love for you to take just a minute and type that into the chat box. Now, not all at once.
Everybody is very shy. This is a great question, but I'm not sure. That's fair.
Absolutely. So we were thinking about some of the ideas of what community meant to us. So Nicole, do you want to discuss them?
Yes. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes. Thank you. We're not looking for a specific, there's not a right or wrong answer right here. We're thinking about where do we all stand as actually a webinar community related to this specific question. So thank you for everything that you've shared. One of the definitions that we found was a group of people with diverse characteristics who are linked by social ties, share common perspectives, and engage in joint action in geographical locations or settings. So McQueen et al. Are a group of healthcare researchers, and this was a definition that was actually generated by a number of participants who are HIV positive that they interviewed in many locations throughout the United States. So with that definition, we could be talking about a community might be a city or a neighborhood, it might be a school or a classroom, it might be an after-school program. And one of the things that we want to problematize, if you'll notice, this definition was generated in 2001, actually probably generated a year or two before that. It was published in 2001. And it says geographical locations or settings. And we want to argue that maybe within the last 14 years since this was published, the geographical place may or may not be a marker of community, because we think about this webinar as a temporary community and Global Conversations itself as its own sort of community of practice. So now that we've thought about what is community,
we also want to take a minute to think about how do we characterize universities. I think it's easy to see why we want to think about community because it's a little bit more broad, but it's very worthwhile too to think about who and what to you represents a community. A university, yeah. In addition, which is something we might not think about as much. I'd love to see what people are putting in there about communities.
Yeah, that's great. The people. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for your question, Tuba. I think that we might respond to that during our Q&A, the question about communities of practice. So we're wondering a little bit, so can you tell us a little bit about who or what represents a university to you? When you think about a university, is there an image that comes into your mind? Students, thank you. Professors, thanks. Academia, support individuals. Great, thank you. Those are wonderful. Okay, so we want to home in on this idea about who or what represents university to you. Because when we, as graduate students or our faculty, leave the campus and we go outside of the campus, I think it's important for us to be thinking about when we're doing research or engaging in any activities, how we might be seen through the eyes of the other, quote unquote. I'm not really fond of this, the other, but I think it might be useful for our conversations temporarily today. How do we present ourselves and how do others see us? So one of the things to think about, an example that I have for you is if I go to a conference, I frequently introduce myself, or even if I'm on campus, I will introduce myself as a Ph.D. student from the Department of Applied Linguistics at Georgia State University. I might mention who my advisor is and what my research interests are. This is a very common way of introducing ourselves in academia. In fact, this is how I was introduced by the Global Conversations group today. However, when I'm at my research site, which happens to be a nonprofit organization right now, I have been introduced as Nicole from Georgia State, doing research at our site. So in that space, I am introduced and I am known as somebody who represents my entire university. And I think it's important for us to have a sense of what do we represent to other people. We have some influence over the answer to that question, but we also have some constraints. I don't really have any control whether somebody will remember what department I'm from or who my advisor is, or whether that's even meaningful to them. But in the spaces where I do have some control, that's what we want to really be talking about. But we do want to mention that because we have some influence, but we also have some constraints, that we need to approach our positions in the community with caution and also with humility. I keep pressing our arrows and I can't do that. So related to our positions in the community and power relationships that are going on, one of the things that we ask ourselves is my research about a community? Is it with a community, or is it in a community, or is it some combination of these? So even though I don't believe that there are lines here, I think I would be more comfortable if they were dotted lines and if there was a little bit more blur between these. But I do want to talk about really quickly about what each of these could mean if we actually did put a box around it. So for example, it's possible to do research about a community without ever stepping foot in that community. I can do research about, I don't know, Chicago in the 1950s, and I can do all of that research without ever going to Chicago. I can also do research in a community. That's how I would characterize the research that I'm doing right now. I go out to the nonprofit organization and I collect data, and the data belongs to me, and they have opened their doors, and I'm a little bit of like a fly on the wall. I engage with them a little bit, but I'm definitely not doing research down here with a community. That would be something where, for example, my research site and I came up with questions together, and we determined many things that we're going to be talking about in a moment. We determined those things together as a team. So my questions came from me. I'm situating myself over here as in a community, and a little bit about a community from time to time. So this isn't a perfect model, but we thought that it could be helpful to be thinking about where we position ourselves and where we would like to be positioning ourselves. Do you have anything you wanted to add here?
I'm not going to lie, I got distracted reading the chat box. But no, I think that it's, and really thinking about this understanding is useful not only for, as a researcher, how are you asking those questions, but it's something I would even encourage really communicating with your community partner so that they know, what is kind of your context and how are you approaching them with it. Really that you want to work with them and develop those questions together versus, as you said, in the community kind of more as that fly on the wall. I think it's a really useful distinction to make with your community partner as well.
So I think this is Tubal who says, it's like being a participant observer or only being an observer. A little bit, yes, although I think it's possible to be a participant observer and still have the research questions come from you and not from the community. So that's why this isn't a perfect model. It's one of the reasons it's not a perfect model. There were many different ways that I problematized this after we put it together. Both of us did. So I want to move on to the next slide, but I want you to keep this slide in mind when we move to the next slide, because together these two slides sort of provide the frame and the context for everything that we're talking about today. So I like to think about those three circles sort of laminated on top of the things that we're looking at here. So we have a lot of questions to think about when we're designing research. And when we decide that we're going to move our research outside of a lab, outside of the controlled contexts that frequently happen at a university, we need to think about the following things. Who's involved and in what ways in choosing an issue or a question, defining a problem if we need to define a problem, designing the research, So are we going to do case studies? Are we going to do ethnography? Are we going to do surveys? If I'm the only person involved, then I'm probably, in making those decisions, then I might not be doing research with a community. I might be doing it in or about. Data collection. So there are research designs in which the researcher is not the only person collecting data, and maybe folks at the community site are involved in collecting the data. Analysis and interpretation of data. And so there are research designs where a researcher, I did this once, it was really hard and I didn't do a very good job at it, I have to confess, where my co-researcher and I tried to analyze and interpret the data together with the community site. So that's something that also can be done. And then determining how do we want to use and disseminate the findings, who gets credit for the work and how, whose name goes on any publications or on any presentation, and who owns the data. And we're going to return to this question of who owns the data in a little bit. So I can't remember if this was me or you.
This is you, and I think really just to structure, really taking, as Nicole just talked about, that framework of about, when, and if, and then how that looks at each stage in the research process. It's kind of everything else we plan on really talking about, looking at those two pieces, and now kind of walking through what some more specific issues within each of that stages look like.
Yes, thanks. Okay, so one of the things that we want to talk about is building inclusive relationships. This is the goal, is that we would have relationships that benefit researchers in universities and the kinds of demands and commitments that we have at universities, but that equally benefit our community partners. So we want to build relationships that are inclusive. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some things that can be done before approaching potential community sites. And one of the first questions I think that it's useful, actually both of us think that it's useful to be asking is, how is my university already engaged in the community? So if we, without wanting to, are maybe representing our university to folks outside of the university, we need to understand how our university is already engaged in the community. We need to get a big picture of those things. And we need to ask ourselves, how does my current work complement or conflict with past, current, or future community involvement at multiple university levels? So I need to know, when I go out, if I'm thinking about approaching a site, maybe that's a site that is already engaged with a different department at my university, and they already have a very deep relationship, and me going out and approaching them could seem a little bit strange, right? Or maybe somebody else in my department has already been thinking about reaching out to a potential site, and by me getting there first, maybe I've created some problems within my department. Or maybe somebody had, maybe a community partner had a bad experience with somebody at our university already. That would be useful for us to know before we actually go out. What were the things that made that relationship difficult? How could we maybe do it better in the future? Is it time yet for us to approach those people?
And I think in addition to really thinking about on the university side, so what does that look like that they're doing? Really understanding then moving towards your community partners, the context of those community partners and what you're moving into. So in addition to anything about the unique organization, there's also assuming that many of the partners that you're looking at in research are those nonprofits. You know, it's going to vary definitely between whether you're going into a school or a more local nonprofit. But to speak to nonprofits, they have some really interesting characteristics which are going to be very relevant to how you work with them as a partner. And kind of understanding the big picture of how that looks, I think will really affect how you approach doing research with them. So one of the issues for most nonprofits is they have a really unique set of stakeholders. As opposed to, you know, a regular business where, you know, you're really about your client for the most part, and your client is the one that's giving you funds by purchasing your service or your product. Most nonprofits who they're actually serving and who is funding their work is very separate. They're dealing with corporate and foundations and individuals, as well as the broader community and, you know, how they fit in with other partnering organizations in the community. In addition to trying to actually serve their clients and kind of put their clients' needs first. And I think that puts them, a lot of nonprofits and other community organizations in a mindset where everyone can be a stakeholder, everyone's a potential donor, everyone's a potential connection to a resource. And so whenever you come to someone in that organization, they kind of always have their happy public-facing exterior on. That's something that will affect how you work with them. In addition, with that funding structure, most all nonprofits that you're going to go out and work with are overworked, all the employees in it, and are very under-resourced to really try to accomplish the mission they're trying to do. And those kind of combination of factors, as well as the fact that most people working in those organizations are there because they want to help make this difference, they want to make a change, really leads to kind of this scarcity mindset and almost a poverty mindset that happens in a lot of nonprofits, that they feel like they're trying to, almost that beggars can be choosers, everyone's a potential stakeholder, everyone's a potential connection to resources, and therefore they're always trying to make sure they give the best impression, and it makes them really bad at saying no. So when you approach someone in the community, they might not be very good at telling you what their real scope of the availability is to work with you. And they're probably not going to be very good and very upfront about telling you some of their challenges. Because in that always talking with donors, they're always kind of trying to minimize that and really tell you how great things are and all the fantastic work they're doing, which can make it really hard for a researcher to find the right information that they're looking for to make smart choices with their research. So once you kind of really think about that overall context of, which that could be so many webinars in and of itself and so many discussions, but certainly not a just description of all of the challenges of the many varied nonprofit and other community-based organizations you work with. But really taking some time to think about that and how that's going to affect your research. Then, of course, it's really looking at the specific organizations you want to work with. And as Nicole was saying, is understanding what's already happening at your university, really starting with your advisor, your colleagues, your classmates for ideas. Who have they worked with in the past? Do they know of potential places that could be a great site? And then, of course, there's always just, Googling can get you a lot of information. So really taking the time for any potential partners that you're interested in with to understand their mission and goals. And I promise you, every one of the organizations will think their specific mission and goals are very unique, even though they might start to sound a lot alike to you. So understanding how those are unique, the population they're working with, the locations they're working on, particularly, we're both working in Atlanta right now, and from one side of Atlanta to the other is really different and can be very difficult to work across there. Mm-hmm. As well as, then how you use all those things to figure out how your research aligns, which goes right into how you actually approach the organization, which I already see some people suggesting in the chat box. We would definitely always recommend volunteering is a ideal first way to get involved with the organization. Because like we said, from the many varying issues that nonprofits in general are facing to understanding that specific nonprofit, the best way is to already have been engaged with them. Mm-hmm. And Nicole has done some really great work with this in her current research, but as a volunteer for a period of time, not only are you going to understand their challenges, you're going to get to kind of test out if they're a good fit, they're really where you want to be and devote your time. But that's also how you start to understand who the players are in the organization, and you understand how it's going to really be a match. And it also means that you have some internal advocates for you before you ever start approaching them about your research. If you can't volunteer with them beforehand, there's still opportunities to find someone in the organization you could learn more about from, find someone else who's volunteered, or maybe you've done that work with them before. But really thinking about how do you engage with them beforehand before you walk in there. So, and that kind of gets to, as we talked about, understanding the organization of the structure, the structure of the organization. Thinking about who you approach and who are kind of the decision makers within the organization. And thinking about all the things they have on their plate when you go to them to talk about doing research. In preparation for this webinar, I started to actually just go through my emails to see, and I had in a month more than 50 people who had really completely unsolicited emailed me to do something with the girls I work with. Whether that was research or come to our event or let us do our program with you. It was so many. And so if you haven't had that interaction with the organization beforehand as a volunteer or in some other way, you are one of that vast amount of kind of cold calls of people that want to do something with us. And that's in addition to our funders that, you know, if we don't have them, we can't do anything, so they kind of do have to come first, and our other regular partners that we might have been working with for years. So thinking about who's the right person to contact and what are the many things on their plate, we need to go out to reach out to them.
Yeah, it's also really important when you think about approaching a research site, when you're thinking about that organizational structure. As many of you know, when we do our IRB applications, at least at Georgia State, we need to have a permission letter from the organization, but we can't already have recruited anyone. And so sometimes the decision maker is an executive director, sometimes that decision maker is a teacher, sometimes that decision maker is a program director. If you're going into the schools, it might be the school district, probably is the school district, but it also might be a principal in conjunction with that. So you're not going to know what that is unless you already have some sort of relationship and you already have some sort of sense of that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is something that I have found really beneficial when I've gone out to do research, when I've approached organizations and just said to them, you know, can we sit down for 25 or 30 minutes sometime? This is what I'm thinking about. Can I just talk to you about it? And I have brought just a one-page summary with bullet points outlining just in very short terms what the whole IRB says, or what my whole 25-page proposal says for my faculty members. And the folks that I've given that to have found it really useful. And I wanted to point out that some of your audience in the community might be very open and really appreciate all of the citations, and they might actually know some of the researchers if they themselves have been in graduate school or have done a Ph.D. in your field. But then there might be many people who are satisfied with research says blank, and that's it. And so really knowing your audience and what they really want to see, what's going to not be overwhelming, but actually get their attention and be something that looks interesting to them. Let's see. So this is about, again, about approaching potential research sites. And I think that this is me. Yeah, so this is my appeal, my encouragement to when you do have that first conversation with someone, to express humbly and delicately how and why you think it could be a good fit for the organization and what you think they might get out of it, and listen. So you'll notice that in that bullet point there, I'm using a lot of hedging because we don't necessarily know. The things that I think might be beneficial to my audience might not be beneficial. To the people that are considering whether they want to partner with me, they might think that's not beneficial. And the more time that we spend with an organization beforehand, the more believable it is that my perspective could be on track and that I have my partner's best interest in mind, that I'm not just in this for myself. Because we do want it to be mutually beneficial, but I can know that I have those intentions, but I need to demonstrate that I have those intentions in a way that's meaningful to the people who I'm asking to partner with me. I also wanted to mention, I thought of this last night after we prepared the slides, that sometimes the things that you think might be beneficial or that are common things that we give to participants for participating in our research, like maybe a gift card, or I'm doing research in educational settings, and so I think about giving a dictionary or something like that. And one of my research sites said, we don't do gift cards. You can't do gift cards. You can't do MARTA cards. You can't do anything that seems like cash. And so there might be, before I actually write that IRB and get those consent forms ready, I need to be having this conversation. Like, what is meaningful to you and also what is meaningful to the people that you're serving. I just wanted to mention that. And then the very last point is, if you're not sure how something might benefit, just say that. But also, express that you want to work towards something that's mutually beneficial, and say that you're listening. Just demonstrate that you have a desire to craft a mutually beneficial relationship. This is sort of an ongoing thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute after Molly talks about this.
And I think it's a really good point, because that just even saying that you want to, that matters to have that mutually beneficial relationship, just sets you apart from some of the people that are trying to get, their word out there for one way or another. And I love how Nicole talks about really that hedging, because you also never want to walk in as that person who might not have any nonprofit experiences, but is going to say, well, of course I could do this or help write grants, or I know how to do that.
Fix all your problems.
Yes, to people who might have been in that every day. So really being considerate of that while you try to be a benefit to them. But this goes back to really understanding kind of some things about how those nonprofits are functioning across the board. And again, that might look different in schools, but a lot of the challenges are the same. And that can really help you kind of uncover what those potential benefits could be of your research. So understanding how this nonprofit gets their funding is going to be one of the ways you can really see how you can help. So for pretty much any community-based organization, at some point they're trying to demonstrate the need that they're serving, and they're trying to demonstrate how they're serving the need. And both for funding requests, grants, as well as marketing purposes, that's information and data that they're really looking for to be able to demonstrate that. So something that your research can do to match that is going to be a benefit, could potentially be a benefit to the organization. I think maybe sometimes we think a little bit less about the fact that research can be actually useful to their programming too. So finding ways that, hey, I'm going to come in, I want to do this research, but this is how it's going to help supplement your programming, it's a good match for your programming, can be another potential way to be a benefit, in addition to those other kind of resources. So either as a volunteer, which most of these organizations are looking for extra manpower that comes from volunteers, particularly skilled volunteers, which sometimes they get many very well-meaning volunteers that don't necessarily have any experience working with their populations or things like that. So coming in as a skilled volunteer, as well as potential incentives, like Nicole was mentioning, gift cards and dictionaries, as long as you're talking to and finding out ways they really align with what their participants need.
So we wanted to give you some examples. So this is my encouragement to, on an ongoing basis, for uncovering potential research benefits on an ongoing basis. So what I do in my research site, and what I've done in the past in my research sites in the community, is I'm watching, I'm asking, I'm listening, and I'm thinking creatively. So things that I've said, this is literally the kind of thing that I said. I think, let's pretend that Molly is the program director at my research site. And so I come to Molly and I go, I think I've been seeing this going on. Am I on track with that? So first I'm asking if my impression is correct, because it might not be correct. And so I say, I think I'm thinking this, but you tell me what's really going on. And then if she says yes, then I say, well, I could do this, I have access to this. Would that be helpful? I don't want to assume that just because I see something going on and I think that I have a response to it, that I really am seeing what I think, and that the response that I have really is the best way to go about solving that problem.
And that gives the program director the chance to say, oh yeah, we tried that 3 times and it didn't work. Or, they might be really excited because they know that's a problem. They've seen that. Again, not necessarily you're informing them something they've never thought of before, but they didn't have the resources to do. And particularly, as I mentioned before, that sometimes it's hard for those community partners to be very upfront about their challenges and things they're missing as they're trying to, promote the good work they're doing. That approach is a really easy way for them to be able to work with you, particularly after you've already started to develop that relationship, as opposed to right on the front end.
Yep. As you're building those relationships over time, if you have the opportunity to be in a research site for, even a couple of weeks, and especially if you're spending much longer, like a semester or a year or 2 years, you're building these relationships, and it just, conversations that happen in the hallway, things that are very informal, that I'm just thinking I always need to be paying attention. So here's some examples. In the classroom where I'm doing some research, I have checked out some technology tools from my university's library for the organization to use. They don't have projectors in the classrooms, and the teacher that I work with really wants to project things. She wants to show a YouTube video and not have to just sort of hold up her laptop like this for the students and say, hey, look, and then sort of go around and go around. You know, she wants to be able to project, so I've checked that out for her. I've also checked out, she's a very reflective teacher, and she wanted to video record herself teaching, and so I checked out some tools for her to video record her own teaching, and I told her she could take that to her other teaching sites where I'm not doing research, and she videotaped herself there too. I also, since I have grant writing experience, I've done editing and given feedback on grants. I'm also carrying out some assessment for them. I saw some assessment needs, and I said, I think I'm seeing this. Would you like it if I did this, this, and this? And they said, oh, that would be so great. That would help us make our case to our funders. And so, so I'm doing that. I've also connected them with university resources for things that I can't actually do. So they've now started to come to me and say, we have this gap, we have this issue, this thing, we're not really sure how to deal with it. And I go, you know what, I don't either. But let me see if there might be something at my university that I can put you in touch with. And so I've tried to do that kind of thing.
And Nicole, those are great examples of, particularly on that, again, working with the funders or those other resources in, but also can really be on that program side. So an example of a researcher I worked with was that, you know, she had reached out and actually had, I was looking for participants to participate in her research around getting girls into STEM, and she wanted to hand out flyers to our parents. But again, you know, she had kind of approached this without necessarily maybe thinking of all those different pieces. Like, we didn't have parents. Our parents wouldn't be able to get the girls across town to participate when they're, you know, they're low income. They're having a lot of those challenges because transportation is so hard. But we were able to work out a scenario where instead we actually brought the girls as a field trip. So for us, it was great programming because it was having girls do STEM, which is one of our goals. It was getting them on a college campus, which is phenomenal. And so it was a really good programming piece for us. And actually, I think met her research needs even better, because as opposed to trying to find these participants, you know, she had a really full class of girls, and she wasn't trying to recruit them one by one. So just a really good way that programming piece can be another benefit that you can offer as a researcher. Yeah. So one of the things we really want to think about as you think about how to be a benefit to your partner is think about how much of a benefit you are offering to them aligns with how much you're asking of them. So when you kind of look at that space of if you're doing community, you're doing research about, with, or in a community, and a lot of times those are going to require a lot different levels of engagement from the university, from the community partner. So if you're doing it about them, you know, you might be asking just for some information. If you're doing it in, again, you might be asking just to kind of be a fly on the wall, which, you know, is going to add some logistical concern and consents and stuff, but it might not change too much about what they're doing. It might not have their facilitators or teachers, you know, participating, whereas if you're really doing it with, that especially is going to require a lot of time and commitment from the organization and to draw on their resources in that way. So making sure that the more you're asking of them in those scenarios, the more they're really getting out of it. If you really want to do research with them, they're going to have probably equal, you know, benefits that are really meaningful. Whereas, you know, something that's a smaller ask, like a program one day, you know, can be a lesser benefit to the organization. And part of that is too thinking about when you approach them and when you're trying to talk about that benefit. I think one of the tendencies I've seen for, you know, people who are doing research is to immediately go to, well, I'm doing research in your area. Don't you want this further? Don't you want the field to know more and, you know, be better about that? Which of course we do. We care about that, and we absolutely want researchers to be finding out more about that and kind of furthering that field of research. but compared to I'm trying to get through the day and I have 50 girls coming and I need resources and people, you know, to get through this week for the clients in front of me, that can't be my top priority at that moment. So really balancing, you know, that kind of really that indirect benefit to the work they're doing to the day-to-day benefit of how they're meeting the immediate need of their clientele.
So I just want to pause for a second and ask Tuba, how are we doing on time? Yeah, sure. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about briefly was about designing the research plan, and this gets back to the idea of how are we positioning ourselves, how do we want to be positioning ourselves in the community. The order in which we carry out our research steps has some bearing upon that question. So it's not really possible for us to write all of our IRB and then go out into the community and say, I want to do this with you, because then the questions are already done, things are already established. So one of the things that we wanted to, questions we wanted to bring up related to data collection is, and I want to make sure I'm not stepping on Molly's toes. Is this me still?
I think, yeah, but really talking about the data, making sure you're looking at the data collection that's already going on at the organization. Because most organizations, for, again, their funders, for those other things they're meeting, they're already doing some data collection, and they can really have problems with their clientele having kind of that, you know, survey fatigue we talk about a lot with what that data collection looks like. So making sure it's working with and not just adding on or even working against the data collection that's already happening there, and making sure that the ways you collect those data are appropriate and as you know, fun and happy to be a part of it as possible, particularly if you're working with kids. But how do you do things that aren't another survey, that aren't you know, what they're used to doing, but doing, you know, fun and interactive ways to collect that data.
And this is something where having communication with that community partner will really help you. So for example, Molly gave an example of, I can do a survey with kids where I put up signs around a big gymnasium and I ask them to run to the sign that is the answer that they want to give. And that's one way that I can do a survey. And this appropriateness of data collection, if we're thinking about collecting data, excuse me, with people who are English language learners or maybe who are emergent readers, we need to be thinking really hard about that, about how we're collecting data. We also wanted to mention that organizations might not have what you expect in terms of technology, and I'll let you.
Yeah, so on my example here is we have, you know, in my organization, we have great classrooms that are iPads, and you'd think we could do surveys, but our Wi-Fi isn't strong enough to do that. So just being really cognizant with your partner that you're not always going to know, again, if you do that IRB and whatnot beforehand, you're not going to know what's possible if you haven't talked to them, because there's a lot of challenges with having the technology to do that. And this gets right into particularly how you are working with your IRB to make that possible. So there's some definite challenges that are going to happen on the community end that are sometimes counter, I think, to the priorities and what's happening with the IRB. So particularly, again, if you're working with minors, you know, having that parent be able to do some of that consent things, the parents aren't always there. Oftentimes it's hard to have them available, and you know, parents are going to be signing many things for all the different field trips and research and all the different ways that we're interacting with our kids. So trying to limit having them do that over and over again, planning in advance. And then, as Nicole mentioned, with those potential second language learners, there's going to be lots of challenges with their ability to interpret and understand all of those pieces. And then assent with some of the younger people too. How can you do that, again, like we would say doing a survey, by having them move around, how can you do an assent in a way that matches them? And all of that, and I think there's already been some questions about how to work with the IRB and kind of really advocate for using those kind of alternative measures, and Nicole's had some real success in that, and I'll let her answer some of those questions too that I know I've seen in the question box that came up. And so last but not least, as we try to wrap up and leave some time for questions, really those potential competing demands around the research. And one of those being who owns that data. You know, again, when you're looking at it, if you're doing it about and or with, particularly if you're doing the data with, and you're matching who, and you're matching those, you know, needs together, developing those questions together, who owns the data might be a real challenge. I would also caution when you talk about confidentiality, the type of confidentiality that a community partner is thinking about might not be the type of confidentiality that you're thinking about as a partner. I know when Nicole and I sat down to discuss that, she kind of blew my mind a little bit in that the things she was bringing up, I was like, oh, I never thought about that. You know, to my mind, thinking about individual clients, particulars, of course, we wanted to keep confidential, but some of the broader aspects weren't things that I had thought about. So really being sure you're having very explicit conversations about these things, because there's going to be a lot of assumptions on both ends that you think you're talking about the same pieces, but you're coming at it from really, really different perspectives that might not always match. So one of the suggestions that is, you know, very commonly used in community-based side is to develop a memorandum of understanding, an MOU that really explicitly outlines each of these pieces. And particularly, maybe not something you would do if you're coming in, you know, one day in a relatively small type of research, but if you're doing something that's lasting and ongoing, and especially something that might potentially change over time, making sure that you've outlined that really explicitly in writing, even with maybe building in when are you going to discuss this again. So, you know, what you think of as confidentiality at the beginning of the project and what you think about at the end might have really changed. So I think Nicole gave an example where the organization was going to be kept confidential and all for research, but what came out of it was actually really useful to the organization, and they wanted their name associated with it because they wanted to be able to use that. And she had to file an addendum with the IRB to be able to disclose who the organization was. So kind of something that you have to continually keep looking at, and having an MOU that explicitly outlines those things as well as when you're going to readdress them can be really useful. And I think last but not least, Nicole had a couple potential other opportunities for this conversation to continue in the future. I know she was really excited about the webinar that's coming up with Virginia Commonwealth University, and we're looking forward to answering in the time we have left what questions we can.
Yes, thank you. We also did a thank you. We want to thank the GCDP team, Molly, where Molly works at Girls Inc. and my department has supported, and then the things that we've shared with you today really come from the many organizations and people that we've learned and worked with. And both Molly and I were AmeriCorps volunteers, and I learned so much in that experience, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't done AmeriCorps. It really was formative. So I wanted to give a special thank you to them as well. And that
all right, thank you very, very much, Nicole and Molly, and I appreciate your last thank you slide there to the organizations that you are committed to, because that demonstrated your inclusive relationship and what you spoke about today. So we very much appreciate your presentation, and we do have time for probably one question from the audience, and at this time, Tuba will go ahead with that question that the participants have put in the chat box for Nicole and Molly. Oh, okay, we'll go ahead and do that then. I know that Emily just put a great question in the chat box that says, how do you know if people are agreeing because they want to agree? What if they think they have to agree or they will be denied services? So perhaps she is speaking to the beginning part of developing that relationship and determining if the research is a good fit for both the researcher and the participant.
And I think this is where we can't stress enough that trying to have the relationship with a partner before you get to that point, because in a lot of ways there isn't, you aren't going to know that unless you've had more of a relationship developed beforehand. But I do think asking really critical, thoughtful questions and really knowing what you're asking for can help. So having a really clear idea of what are, the time commitments going into it, and thinking really inclusively about that, from making copies all the way to having, someone collecting consent and forms and whatnot, and all the little ways that that's going to draw on, potential resources from yourself and from the partner, and being very upfront about that can help, because I think sometimes people, they say yes without necessarily thinking about all of those resources that are going to be needed. And then I think what Nicole said about really trying to observe and listen very intentionally. It's easy if you're looking for a yes answer to hear that without maybe hearing some of the potential, I don't know, I guess maybe parts that can kind of go into that, and some of the concerns that they might bring up, but very softly, because they are trying to, make it work. And making sure you're talking to the right people is the other thing. I think Nicole had a great, and I'm sorry, if you want to add it, but helping the research site think through who needed to be in on asking that question.
Yeah, I think actually, I'm wondering if Emily is thinking more, in addition to thinking about a potential research site saying yes or no, thinking about when you go to do consent, whether the people that you want to participate in the research, whether they say yes because they think, I have to say yes or I can't come to English class, or I have to say yes or I'm not going to get the medical services that I need. And I think that might have been part of her question, especially when we talk about doing research across cultures, what coercion means. So there's a macro ethical principle that we all agree with. We're all on the same page with the IRB that we shouldn't, there shouldn't be any coercion and that there should be confidentiality. However, the macro ethical principle of non-coercion plays out differently and means different things in different cultures. And so having a really good sense of what the cultural meanings of coercion are and what coercion looks like in different spaces cross-culturally, I think is really, really important. I think having interpreters is really important. I have done consent at this research site that I'm at right now. It will be 10 languages by the time that I'm done. So just doing consent is costing a lot of money, never mind the data collection on top of it. So,
anything to follow up too on Emily, you expanded there a little bit on the question, like for example that you gave, like the field trip as a researcher, being really clear about how you would handle that or that situation to the organization as well. Because I think we might not always assume that this good girl still could come on this field trip and be part of this experience without being one of your research participants. And we might not always communicate that on the community side very clearly, because it's not something that we maybe understand those distinctions with as well as you do. So making sure you're also kind of educating your nonprofit partner who might have a better relationship with explaining, with talking to parents that have questions. But that would be helpful.
But that is supposed to be laid out in the IRB. Part of the consent process when you do an IRB is to say, here's what you get out of it. Here's what we're, like proposing, right, as a thank you, a gift card or the field trip like Emily mentioned or whatever. And you can say, if you choose not to do this, it doesn't change. Usually we need to say this in our IRBs. It doesn't change your relationship, with the organization, with me, with your teachers, with whomever, right? Now, whether people believe that or not, I think really depends on how we go about doing that in that space. And that's where having not just interpreters, but cultural brokers and those kinds of things really helping you. I rely on my cultural brokers and my interpreters a lot to help me navigate those waters and to keep me from making a lot of mistakes. So I know we're getting almost close to the end, but I think that was a really great question. Thank you.
All right, and thank you both very much too. That was a wonderful response and also wonderful questions in the chat box. Again, thank you all very much for participating. participating in our webinar tonight, and a very special thank you to Nicole and Molly, who provided us wonderful and very, very informative information tonight. If anybody in our audience would like to participate in a 15-minute online interview as part of our GCDP research study, please type your name and email address in the chat box. And we would also appreciate if you could take our survey. The link is on the slide, and it can also be found on our website. This series of GCDP webinars is the result of the hard work of a team of doctoral students, pictured on this slide, who are working together to create global conversations among like-minded people. I also want to alert you to the upcoming and final webinar seminar for this spring. On May 17th, Kim Foster, Kyle Jones, and Nick Thompson from Kennesaw State University will be presenting on From the Water Cooler to the Fire Hose, teaching our way through an English Ed doctorate. We hope that you will mark this date on your calendar, and please, if possible, spread the word through your social networks. Also, if you would like to present at GCDP, you may consider inviting friends and colleagues from other universities or from different parts of the world to do joint research presentation with you. As we wrap up this evening's seminar, please take a moment to follow us on Facebook, WordPress, Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All the links can be found on our WordPress site. We hope you will share this information with your friends and colleagues. Again, thank you very much to Nicole and Molly for their informative presentation. We learned a lot, and thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate your presence and your participation. We look forward to having you next time. Thank you again, and good evening.